I had asked if knowing what you knew a year ago, if you would have picked to do it as a Democrat or a Republican convention, and you were about to answer that question.
Okay, well, of all the staff members that did this kind of thing, that they all, almost to a man, preferred Democrat. They're just more interesting program.
Because teachers are Democrats?
There were more issues involved.
How?
No,
wouldn't it be the case that they would be the same issues, just a different perspective on the issue?
It was, I mean, they had just more topics discussed. The Democrats and Republicans both had extensive platforms, for example, but the issues that were bothering them, like trade, for example, or abortion, etc., the Democrats put more time discussing those on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I mean, maybe that would have changed by now, but there were just more issues. For example, when we did, we invited other groups to come and set up tables so that kids could get their information, like what is it? Abortions. Okay,
sure.
We'd have a table there, and it was pretty sickening what they would set up there. But the kids were interested, and the teachers, in large part, were interested as well. Now, occasionally, some of the southern schools would object to those things, and so we'd put it to a vote of a faculty meeting in the Coliseum, and it would come down to 65 to nothing. I mean, 65 to 1 in favor of keeping them. In other words, the more...
When you mean southern schools, are you talking like Ashland or Georgia?
Oh, Ashland.
Yeah, okay.
And that wasn't Ashland. Ashland is a...
Oh, I know.
liberal.
Ashland's liberal. Right, no. Klamath Falls or something.
Yeah. That would be the killer. But just that, in large part, social science teachers are interested in issues, and anybody that would take on this program was one that would be involved in as many things as possible.
Right.
So that was, I mean, that was well worthwhile doing this, but I think that the Republican probably would have been more interesting.
This time around for sure. What's your thoughts on Trump and Cruz?
On what?
On Donald Trump and Ted Cruz.
Well, they both need some training.
Well, I mean, you've been around a little while, a couple, 2-3 years here. Would you say that we've seen people like either of them before, or are they unique in some way?
Yeah, who's the guy that was from Minnesota that the fascist 35 years ago? Okay, well,
I mean, you're not. I mean,
he reminds me of Cruz, for example. He would. Cruz says that when he is elected, he would immediately cancel out health care,
right,
and homosexuality would be outlawed,
right,
such things like that. Well, you know, the Democratic side would never do something like that. I mean, they were more flexible.
What about Trump?
Trump would be opposed to things, but he's convincible occasionally. But his things that he would be opposed to would be like the trade practices.
Right. In your opinion, have we seen in this country a Donald Trump type politician before, or is he? I mean, for someone this far in American presidential politics, is he unique, or do you think he's similar to other politicians we've had in this country before?
No, I think that, well, I think he's pretty unique, but he still matches some of the other people that came up. Huey Long, for example, in Louisiana.
That's what I was thinking of.
When the first time that he ran, he really was a legitimate politician. He wanted to accomplish things that were good for the state of Louisiana. But his second time around, after he had lost the first time, I mean, he was wacko, and then became corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with Trump. I think that, you know, he doesn't know what he's doing, for one thing, and when he puts on these programs, he draws a lot of people, no question about it. But when he does that, somebody will ask him a question. Well, what about this wall you want to build across the southern part of the United States? He said, yeah, that's right, we're going to do it, and the Mexicans will pay for it. He doesn't know if the Mexicans will pay for it or not, and I'm telling him that they won't.
Of course.
And the same with every other question he gets asked. He says, yep, that's really a good question. I'll get my best people on that.
I know the best words.
Yeah, and then next.
I want to make the connection here between the convention and Trump. If we were running a Republican convention this year, would you invite Donald Trump?
Sure.
Is there any reason not to?
No. But no.
But he's I mean, his rhetoric is very hateful.
He's what?
His rhetoric is very hateful. I mean, he says terrible things about women, about gender minorities, about
Muslims.
Mexicans, Muslims. I mean, the list is long. The Pope. So is the idea of giving him a platform to talk to 4,000 high school students could be seen, I think, by some people as risky, or promoting. Why give Donald Trump the platform, the airtime to speak in front of 4,000 high school kids, and encouraging high school students to pretend that they're Donald Trump fans, and get riled up and promote his same hateful rhetoric. I know you're in favor of critical thinking, but is there a line where it's just not critical thinking and it's just hate speech?
Well, yeah, on his part, but not on the listener's part. Look, for example, back in...
Keep talking. Yep.
Okay, back in, 1972, when, who was the governor of Alabama that ran for president?
Oh, that's embarrassing. I don't know his name now either.
Anyway.
George Wallace.
Yeah, George Wallace, okay. He was preposterous. You know, I mean, he gave lectures around the country running for president.
Right.
Okay. Now, nobody was taking him very seriously except a bunch of Southerners. Okay, so when he went to the convention, I was at the convention, and that they voted that to let him speak about the platform, because he wanted to modify about a dozen of the platform planks. Okay, and
at the real convention.
What?
At the real convention or at the high school convention?
The real one.
Okay.
Okay, and so the reason that they should have him there and do that is because even though the things he was proposing were sort of unacceptable to the bulk of the American population, they still ought to have him speak his point, and so he did. And he got up to the microphone and would read the plank. He said, I move that we modify and amend this particular plank and said the new one. And then they had a voice vote of everybody in the convention, and it came out with yay and nay, and the nays won every one of them.
Sure.
They turned him down. Okay, and at that point, I was standing on the floor right beneath his podium when he was talking. You know, now the reason that we had to do that is because, you know, I mean, he was a major force, at least in Southern politics, and you ought to be able to listen to everybody. And he might be able to influence people negatively, but the assumption was we have faith in people to analyze what he's saying. Okay, now with Donald Trump, the same thing. I mean, teachers that were involved, and we emphasized this in the training for our conventions. When we had advisors meeting, I would talk to advisors and say, you have to talk to the students about being critical about what they're hearing here, whether they happen to be for or against, whatever. They have to be able to think about what's being said. And so just because they don't agree with somebody, as long as they can analyze why, then they're okay. Well, it reminds me in 1964, we had a kid by the name of Joel Skousen. He was ultra conservative, the most conservative kid I ever had in class that I knew of. And his uncle wrote a book called The Naked Communist. And the uncle was a John Birch Society member and extremely far right, and so was Joel. Well, we put him in charge of one of the states, I can't remember, Alabama maybe, something like that. And so that was his job. And halfway through the convention, when he could get nobody to operate from the point of view that Goldwater knew what he was talking about, he came to me almost in tears, and he said, "No, how come no one will listen to me as to what we should be doing here?" And so I had a long talk with him up on the stage there, just privately, you know, saying, you know, the things you're suggesting are just outside of the normal run of American thinking. And so, you know, and that's fine for you to be like that, except that you're not looking at some things in the same way that the rest of the people here are looking at it. And so, I mean, it was kind of interesting. Now, I'd like to find out old Joel now what he's thinking about. But his whole family was ultra conservative. And it was just, you know, you have to be able to have talks with people that you don't necessarily like or agree with, so you can, you know, judge whether you're right or wrong.
Right.
And so, and I think he learned a fair amount there at that he was a senior that year when that happened.
What year was this?
64.
64. This is the first convention.
Yeah. Yeah. first year. Yeah, and he was a nice kid. I liked him, but he was just wacko when it came to critical thinking on the liberal side. He could not see any value in the liberal mentality about anything. Now, for example, about welfare, he says cut them off. If they can't go out and get a job like the rest of us, they ought to starve, no problem. And he said that we have to have this very powerful military to stop the Russians, and all sorts of trade patterns he was talking about. And, you know, you shouldn't trade with the Russians because they're going to learn some of our trade secrets.
Right.
And so, but I think you ought to do that. I think that Ted Cruz and Donald Trump would be interesting people to have at a convention, at our convention.
Right.
But the question is, would we have picked that? I don't know.
Would Would you have felt strange to shake their hands backstage before they went on stage at the convention? No.
No. I mean, I remember we had Ronald Reagan delivered to the Coliseum, and the Secret Service had him going behind curtains and so forth into the back room back there that was surrounded by 2 feet of concrete walls.
Right.
And then Tom and I were on our way back to shake hands with him and so forth, and I happened to have one of those pins that the Secret Service wears. They gave it to me so I could go anywhere I liked. Otherwise, they stopped people.
Ah, sure.
Well, Tom didn't have one, and he was about 4 steps behind me. So I walked through the door, and Tom goes up there and says, "Hold it." They wouldn't let him in because they couldn't verify whether he was valid or not.
Right.
And I didn't know he was having problems out there. So
right.
He didn't get to shake hands with old Reagan. But that's fun. I mean, that's nice to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I just think that you have to be able to get along with everyone, people that you disagree with and agree with. And you know, I'm Democrat, and occasionally I've thought about voting for a Republican, but that makes me sick.
Did you ever vote for Hatfield or Packwood?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Consistently?
Yeah.
You know they're Republicans.
What?
You know they're Republicans,
Well,
right?
Yeah. But yeah, and especially Hatfield, you know, he was good on the peace end of it.
Right.
And I can't remember about Packwood, but he was heavily involved in budget.
He was on Ways and Means for a long time.
The what?
He was on Ways and Means and Appropriation.
Yeah. And was doing a lot on budget reform.
Right.
And I thought that was good.
I see you looking at your watch. Do we need to
No, we're fine.
get out of here? Okay.
It's 20 minutes to 5.
Okay, that's fine with me. I was wondering now. So you said you went to Franklin, right? And then you taught at Sunset, and you taught at Aloha. In all of that time, I mean, I know we've had this conversation off and on again. Would you say that school is, from the student perspective, is basically the same, or is it significantly different in some way? Is being a student in the 40s the same as being a student now?
Yeah, I think it's sort of generally the same, but I'm not real familiar with what's going on right now.
Okay, well, till 2000 when you were there, roughly around 2000, 2005, when you left Aloha. I mean, was it? No, you're not up to this year, but up to your last years of teaching.
I think that by 2005 in Aloha was far better than that Franklin ever was, as far as the teaching goes. Mm-hmm. But that's not in every case.
Right.
I thought that the social science department, when I was at Sunset, the social science department was considered just the best in the state by far. But that didn't include every teacher.
Sure.
Because we started the convention there, and not every teacher that we had was interested in participating. Mm-hmm. And that was as a result of hiring coaches that were also going to be teaching academics. Even Ken Yarnell, who was a good teacher, he recognized that during basketball season, when he was basketball coach, his teaching was not as
There's
good.
only so many hours in the day. I mean,
Yeah.
Do you feel like your teaching was affected during the times that you were occupied with the convention?
Yeah, well, I thought
that's-
it was good because
Is it not the same sort of metaphor here?
yeah, it was.
The coaches are occupied with their practices and such, and that takes up a lot of their time. So during the convention, you were also occupied. Did you feel like your